friends, it's Miss Drywa. How are you? So for this week for science, we are learning about our last two planets in the solar system. We have talked about so far 6 of them, and now today we're gonna learn about our 7th, and then tomorrow we'll learn about our 8th. Okay, so let's get started. We're gonna use our acronym or our saying to help us find out what planet we're on next. Right? And then we'll learn about that planet, and then you'll fill in your facts, and then, yeah, have a great day. So let's get started. So, remember, we have our saying here, my very excited mother just served us nachos. So we're going to try and figure out what planet we're up to today. So, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, we did Saturn last week, so now we're up to this one, Uranus. Now, this planet actually, you might hear it 2 different ways when they say it. It's Uranus or Uranus, okay? Whichever one is fine. I was actually taught Uranus back when I was in school. However, I do know some people who were taught Uranus. So, whichever one you hear is perfectly fine. But I'm going to say Uranus just because that's what I've always called it. So today we're learning about Uranus. Now, that's you for us, right? My very excited mother just served us nachos. And remember, this is the order of the planet from the sun. So if I bring this one up, right, we have our sun here, our starting point, right, the center of our solar system. We learned about Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and now we're here on Uranus. So we're very, very, very far from the sun. We're actually 2.871 billion kilometers away from the sun. That's very far. Very, very far, friends. So these planets, as we get further away from the sun, they feel less heat from the sun, so they tend to be colder planets, which we'll learn about. Okay? So, let's take a look. So, oh, wrong one. Sorry, friends. So here we are. Uranus, right? That's our planet, and you can see it kind of looks cold. I don't know. It's like blue and almost looks a little cloudy looking. It looks kind of cold, but it is very cold on this planet, which we will learn about. So, alrighty, I'm going to move myself up so we can see everything. So Uranus. Uranus is the 7th planet from the sun. Right? So we talked about Jupiter and Saturn last week. They were 5 and 6. So now we're on our 7th out of 8 planets. So we're almost finished with all our planets. We're actually almost finished with our whole solar system. So Uranus is the 7th planet. That's number 7 from the sun. It is a gas giant because it is made up of gas. So just like last week we learned about Jupiter and Saturn, they were both gas giants. That just means they're planets that are made up of gas. So now Uranus is also a planet made up of gas. Since it is so far away from the sun, it is a very cold planet. So just like I just said, right, friends, it's very, very, very far away from the sun. So it tends to be very cold because it doesn't see as much sunlight as the other planets do that are closer, right? Or it's not getting that heat from the sun like it would if it were closer to it. It takes 84 Earth years for Uranus to travel all the way around the sun. So that's 84 years, not days, but years to orbit around the sun. And remember, orbit, you have your sun, and it just means for Uranus to go around it, right? It takes 84 years. That's a very, very, very long time. But because, like I said with the other planets, they tend to be further away, so they tend to take longer to make a complete orbit around the sun, right? A complete round around the sun. Here's an interesting fact though, friends. Uranus also has rings. So remember we talked about last week that Saturn had these rings? Let me see if I can pull up a picture. So this was Saturn. Remember we talked about these rings and they were made of ice and dust and rocks? Well, Uranus also has rings. It's very, very hard to see them, but they are there. They're very, very light. They're not big like Saturn's rings. So they're very tiny and they're very thin. So the rings are made up of black dust and rocks. Okay, so kind of similar to Saturn's rings. Saturn's rings are made up of ice and dust and rocks. Well, these rings are made up of dust and rocks. Not so much ice, but dust and rocks, right? And like I said, the rings are just not as big as Saturn's. But they are there, and they're very, very, very hard to see. That's why when we look at this picture here, remember this picture is taken with a telescope, a very, very fancy, expensive telescope with a camera on the end. And even the camera couldn't catch the rings, okay, because they're very light, they're very small, and they're very hard to see. Okay, but they do have rings. And Uranus has 27 moons. So like we've talked about, some of our moons, some of our planets have no moons, right? Some of them have one moon, like Earth. We only have one moon. And then some have a whole bunch of them, right? Some had up to almost, they think, 150 moons. Well, Uranus has 27 moons. That's still a lot, friends. I couldn't imagine of going outside and seeing 27 moons in the sky, right? So, let's see how it compares to orbiting the sun. So, days to orbit the sun, right? So, we've talked about Mercury only took 88 days. And Venus took 225 days. Earth takes 365 days. That's a full year for us. Mars takes 687 days. Jupiter took about 12 years to orbit the sun. Saturn took way more. We thought that was crazy. 29 years to orbit the sun. Now we have Uranus. It takes about 84 years to orbit the sun. That is super, super long. Friends, my grandma is 84 years old. So that means it takes about her whole current life for Uranus just to go around the sun one time. That's super long. Super duper long, friends. 84 years. Wow. So, we're up to Uranus, right? Here's a picture of it. We said it was very cold, right? Very cold planet. We also said that Uranus is the 7th planet from the sun, right? We learned that today. So it's very far, it's very cold. We learned that it's a gas giant, which just means it's made up of gas. The planet itself is just made up of gas. Okay? We also learned it has 27 moons. That's a lot of moons. We learned that even though you can't really see them, there are rings around Uranus. They're made of dust, black dust, and rocks. And they're very hard to see because they're small and they're not very, they're just not as easy to be seen as Saturn's does, because Saturn's are much bigger, their rings. Okay, but the rings do go around Uranus just like the rings go around Saturn, right? And we learned that it takes 84 years to orbit the sun. 84 years, friends. That is so crazy. All right, so we learned a lot of facts today on Uranus, our next planet, right? And we can even though we've been only doing comparison and contrast between 2 planets at a time, but just to think about the facts that we've learned, right? And how now Saturn and Uranus, they both have rings. Let me tell you something. I didn't always know that. I did not always know that Uranus had rings. That was some new information to me at one point. I knew Saturn had rings, but Uranus I didn't know about. Pretty cool. We also know that the 27 moons. So we know how that's so different from Earth. Earth only has 1 moon, where now Uranus has 27 moons. So crazy how all these planets are so different, but some of them are so the same. So crazy, friends. So great job today. Nice following along. You learned lots of facts about Uranus, your next planet, and by the time we are done, you are all going to be superstars. You're going to work for NASA after all this because you're going to know so much information. All right, so great job, and until next time, friends. Bye.